Chapter 17. Basil Staghare and Jess Squirrel were thick as thieves. When they were not helping with the defenses, they could be found in odd corners, whispering together. Nobody knew what their conversations were about or what exactly they were plotting. But with the fastest runner and the champion climber of Mossflower, it was sure to be something spectacular. Cornflower and Silent Sam watched them stealing off at lunchtime to continue their conspiracy beneath the trees in the orchard, where they would not be disturbed.
"What do you suppose your Mum and Basil are up to, Sam?"
asked the young field mouse, whose curiosity was aroused. Silent Sam shrugged his tiny shoulders and buried his head in the lunchtime milk bowl. He drank in a noisy, enjoyable infant fashion. Whatever Jess was planning had Sam's complete approval, simply because his mother could do no wrong as far as he was concerned. Basil stretched comfortably in the shade, while Jess sat out in the sunlight, her tail curled overhead, acting as a sunshade. "Ah, this is a life, Jess, me old climber." Basil yawned cavernously as he fed crumbs to the ants. "Plenty to keep the inner creature satisfied. Scorching June weather, and a top-hole billet for snoozing. What? Jess nibbled on a wedge of cheese.
"Aye, and it's up to woodlanders like us to keep it that way, Basil. What sort of neighborhood would this be for young'uns like my Sam to grow up in if Clooney and his lot were to take over?"
Basil humphed through his military-style whiskers. "Good grief. Doesn't bear thinking about, old girl. Those rats and vermin, an absolute shower of yahoos and cads. Bad influence, you know." They both sat nodding in agreement, faces full of grim righteousness, uttering dire home truths and generally working themselves up into a fine old state of indignation.
"Clooney the scourge, a bully and a braggart if ever I clapped eyes on one."
"Yes, and a robber to boot. Fancy stealing Martin's tapestry from the mice. What harm have they ever done to him?"
"You know, it strikes me that it do the Father Abbot's heart good to see that tapestry back in its rightful place again."
"Indeed it would, and the troops would take new heart."
"What a blow it would be to that fella Clooney and its filthy band of robbers."
Basil bounded up and ate the last of Jess's cheese decisively. "Well, what are we waiting for, then? Come on, Jess, you old hazelnut waffler. Up and at 'em. Forward the fur!" Jess flexed her climbing claws and bared her teeth angrily.
"Just you try and stop me,"
she chattered fiercely. Without telling anyone of their intentions, the two expert campaigners slid out secretly by one of the small doors in the abbey walls. Soon they were stealing through the green noontide depths of Mossflower Wood. Clooney was up and about. His first decision was to put the horde through their paces. He had decided that they had become fat and lazy from lying about in the church grounds, while he was confined to bed. But now that he was on the mend, they were going to do some drill. Standing on a tombstone, he leaned slightly upon his standard and viewed the army in training. Panting and sweating, a large mob of rats dashed to and fro, burdened by the battering ram. The captains, hoping to curry favor with Clooney, harangued the hapless runners.
"Pick your feet up, you lily-livered scum! Come on, lift that ram properly, you idle devils!"
Practice tunnels were being dug willy-nilly, owing to the lack of communication between rats and other species. Ferrets, weasels, and stoats, their faces smeared with moist dark earth, popped up out of the ground in the oddest of places. Unaccustomed to such strenuous labor, they would stop digging as they pleased, basking in the sun until they were trodden on by columns of marching rats. A squabble would ensue until they all became aware of the watchful eye of Clooney. Then it would be heads down, resume marching, get back to tunneling. Either side of Clooney on the tombstone stood Darkclaw and Killconey. Scornfully watching the chaotic maneuvers, the warlord would criticize first one, then the other for the shortcomings of the creatures they represented. Both squirmed under the lash of the chief's tongue. Darklaw, look at the way those rats are marching. Idiots! They look like a flock of lambs at a village school outing. Haven't you taught them anything? Oh, hellfire! That stupid lot with the battering ram have just marched straight into a tunnel. Clooney, tell those morons of yours not to tunnel into the parade ground. Just a minute. That weasel there, the one grinning all over his face like a drunken duck. Lock him up without food or water for 3 days. That'll wipe the daft smile off his face. Well, what a fine pair of commanders you two turned out to be. I can't turn my back a minute, and you've got all hands behaving like mad frogs in a bucket. Clooney ranted and fumed at the animals under his banner. They were going to march, sweat, dig, carry, drill, and tunnel until they performed to his satisfaction. Sloppy idle lot. He'd show them now that he was back. He'd keep them at it all day and all night if need be. Clooney had taken a vow while he lay injured. Never again would he allow himself to be thwarted by mice and woodland creatures. At that precise moment, it was 2 of those same creatures who stood on the fringe of Mossflower Wood, spying across the common land to where Clooney's army was exercising. But for the gravity of the situation, Basil and Jess would have seen the chance for many a good laugh. What a difference between the antics of this rabble and the way in which the Abbey defenders went about their business of training. Just observe that it was the contrast between slaving under a tyrant and voluntary cooperation that arose from determination and good fellowship. The plans of the 2 comrades were well laid. Basil decided that now was as good a time as any to put them into operation. He turned to Jess. Well, you old tree jumper, let's see if we can't baffle the blighters with science. They shook paws and ventured out onto the common land. Basil Staghair, camouflage expert and foot fighter, in the lead. Jess Squirrel, champion climber and pathfinder, close behind him. They were like twin cloud shadows, drifting silently across the land. Clooney had climbed down from his perch on the tombstone. He stood by the churchyard fence, intent on trying out the whipping powers of his fearsome tail upon a few rats that he had dubbed the Awkward Squad. Flexing his long, scourge-like tail, he gave a few experimental swishes and cracks as he shouted commands. Left wheel! I said left wheel, you buffoons! You there! Don't you know the difference between your left and your right? Hold out your left paw. The frightened rat stuck out what he fervently hoped was his left paw. Swish! Crack! The unfortunate rodent screamed and danced about with the stinging pain of the thick whip-like tail. Clooney foamed with ill temper. Blockhead! That was your right paw! Now hold out your left, stupid! I'm going to make an example of you this lot won't forget. A voice interrupted him. Tut tut! Officer striking an enlisted creature. Bad form, old chap. Thumping bad form. Clooney whirled around. Just out of reach across the fence, on the common land stood Basil Staghair, in the at-ease position. Clooney goggled and thunder-struck silence at the audacious Basil, who merely scowled in mock censure. Not the sort of thing one expects from a horde commander, what? Personally, I'd have you blackballed from the church premises. Clooney's voice was a strangled yell. Get him! Grab that spy! I want his head! Basil chuckled. What's the matter? Isn't your own head good enough? No? I don't suppose it is. Ugly-looking brute, aren't you? A mob of rats had scrambled through the fence to catch Basil, but it was like trying to catch smoke upon the wind. It was there and gone. From her hiding place, Jess tried hard to stifle her giggles. After several exhausting minutes, it became apparent that neither the rats nor the dozen or so panting ferrets, weasels, and stoats who had joined the chase on Clooney's orders were remotely close to apprehending the strange hare. Gripping the standard in bloodless claws, Clooney climbed over the fence to the common land. The comrade's scheme was beginning to work. Basil bobbed up alongside Clooney. "What-ho, old rat! Showing a bit of initiative? Never ask the troops to do what you can't do yourself and all that. Splendid!" He dodged playfully out of reach. Clooney snarled and went after him. Basil ducked and weaved, drawing Clooney further out onto the common. All eyes were upon the two figures. This made it easier for Jess to change hiding places as she followed them. Clooney pursued doggedly, making no sudden moves, waiting for the hare to get overconfident so that he could strike. His soldiers moved about 20 paces behind the action. Clooney had warned them off. He wanted a one-on-one confrontation. Clooney jabbed out with the banner at Basil. The hare inwardly rejoiced. They were getting closer to Mossflower Wood. Soon Jess would make her move. Meanwhile, he must draw the rat further out, avoiding the stabs of the banner pole and the swift whip-like slashes of the tail. Basil realized that this was no clumsy rat he faced. He chanced a sudden glance to check if Jess was nearby. As he did, his back left leg shot down into a pothole. It twisted, and Basil fell heavily to the ground. Clooney charged in. He lifted the banner and slammed it down on the hare's unprotected head. Basil twisted quickly to one side. "No, Jess! No!" he yelled. As Basil shouted, several things happened at once. Jess came blasting out of nowhere like a red whirlwind. The banner thudded into the soft earth where Basil's head had been a fraction of a second before. Basil freed his leg as Jess leaped like a salmon. In midair, she ripped the tapestry clean off the standard in one go. Clooney bellowed with rage. His followers came surging across the common to aid him. Basil leaped to his feet and hobbled gamely in front of Clooney, shielding Jess. The squirrel raced about, trying to distract Clooney. Basil winced as he called out to his friend. "Run for it, Jess! I'll hold them off!" Jess ducked a blow from Clooney's tail.
"Not likely. If you stay, then so do I."
Basil limped about, keeping himself between Clooney and Jess. "You stubborn beast!" he yelled. "Will you get going?" The horde was almost upon them. Quick as a flash, Jess grabbed the end of Clooney's tail. She swung him with all of her might, throwing him off balance and sending him crashing into the front runners of the horde. Jess threw Basil's paw about her shoulder.
"Come on, Basil. Head for the woods. We'll make it together."
Both creatures dashed from the common into the depths of Mossflower. Behind them, Clooney's horde was in headlong pursuit, yelling and shouting. As they ran, Jess panted.
"Yeah, take this and give me the decoy. Hurry."
Basil snatched the tapestry and reached beneath his tunic. He gave Jess the crude replica they had prepared, which was in reality an old dishcloth from Friar Hugo's kitchen. The sound of the pursuers grew louder. They were gaining.
"Now, you drop out of sight."
Jess gasped.
"I'll draw them off. Then you can double back through the churchyard and up through the road to Redwall. They'll never think of searching along that way."
As suddenly as she had spoken, Jess glanced to one side. Basil was no longer there. A breathless military voice whispered from the undergrowth. "Will do, old chum. See you back at the Abbey. Have a good chase now. Cheerio." Basil's stag hair, camouflage expert, had gone to Earth. Jess could see Clooney and the horde coming through the trees. She stood and waited until they caught sight of her. She saw Clooney point and shout. "Over there! The squirrel! She's the one who's got the tapestry! Get her! Take her alive if you can!" Coolly, Jess stood her ground until they were almost upon her. Right at the last second, she went like a blur up the side of a horse chestnut tree, stopping just out of reach. Some of the more agile ones tried climbing to get at her. Jess merely scampered further upwards. "Get down, you nincompoops!" Clooney hissed. "Don't try to outclimb a squirrel. See if you can keep her near the ground while I think what to do." The rats climbed down. As they did, Jess returned to the lower trunk. She had to buy as much time as possible to allow Basil's escape. Clooney lounged nonchalantly against the tree. Well done, Squirrel. Very clever indeed. I could use someone like you in my army. Somebody smart, with brains like yours. Clooney also demonstrated his persuasive powers.
Ah, you take the chief's word. He's looking for a good first officer. Why don't you come down now and talk it over? Sure, the loot will be grand when we conquer the Ouch!
A small green spiky chestnut, still in its husk, bounced off the vociferous ferret's head. Jess moved higher to a branch with a more plentiful supply. She waved the decoy tapestry at Clooney.
Is this what you're after, rat face?
Clooney battled to keep his temper. Darkclaw nudged him and whispered,
What about the other one, Chief? Shall I take some troops and start searching for him?
No, I'll deal with the hare another time. Right now I want you all here in case there's a chance of trapping this one, Clooney murmured. Jess's keen ears caught every word the warlord had said. The plan had worked. She threw a hard, spiky nut and called to Clooney.
Hey, rat face! Do you actually think that you've got this one trapped? I'm about as trapped as a skylark in the air on a clear day. There's not one of you can get me.
I know that, Squirrel, Clooney answered. But just think for a moment. If I win the war against the mice, and I will, you know, I've made a vow to kill everyone inside Redwall. Now suppose that you've got someone dear to you in there. You know what I mean. A mate, a little baby, some family. Clooney dodged about as a shower of spiky chestnuts hurled down.
You filthy, murdering scum!
Shouted Jess.
You rotten, loathsome slime! If you come near my family, I'll rip that evil eye of yours right out of your face!
Clooney knew that he was succeeding with his scheme against the squirrel, as more hard chestnuts pelted down. Throwing things won't do you much good. Listen, I'm a reasonable creature. All I'm asking you to do is to think of your family. You haven't got to join us if you don't want to. Stay up in that tree forever if you want. It doesn't bother me. All I need is that little scrap of tapestry. It isn't much to ask, is it? Your loved ones will be safe if you hand it over. Jess was about to hurl more nuts and insulting remarks when the form of Clooney's plan dawned on her. The rat was trying to do exactly as she and Basil had done. It was a trap to make her become careless. Two can play at that game, Jess thought to herself. The horde soldiers watching the squirrel noticed a change come over her. She appeared agitated, gnawing upon her lips and rubbing her paws together. In anguish, she clutched the tapestry, hugging it to her body.
I don't care about the others at Redwall, but I've got a husband and a small son. You wouldn't hurt them, would you, Clooney?
The warlord detected a sob in the squirrel's voice. No, of course I wouldn't, he said soothingly. All you have to do is to let go of that scrap of cloth and let it drift down here to me. The moment you do, your loved one's safety is assured. Believe me, Squirrel, I give you my word of honor. Jess wiped her eyes on the decoy cloth and sniffled piteously as she answered.
But, all right then. If I have your promise that my family will be safe, then you can have this old thing. It means nothing to me.
Jess released the piece of material. It drifted down through the branches. Clooney could scarcely restrain himself from leaping for it. Clooney hurried forward, his eyes shining with reverence. He picked the dish rag up gently, offering it to Clooney.
Here you are, Your Honor, the lovely thing itself, safe and sound.
Avidly, Clooney snatched the cloth. His eyes narrowed. something was wrong. He gave a scream of terrible rage. Instantly, his followers scrambled into the bushes as their chief ripped the tapestry into shreds, his mighty claws rending and tearing as he roared madly. "It's a fake! A copy! Worthless trash! Ah!" From her perch in the tree, Jess watched with grim satisfaction.
Aye, worthless trash, rat, just as you are. The real tapestry is back at Redwall by now. You've been fooled.
"Kill her! Kill the dirty little swindler!" Clooney's cry rang out, but before a spear or a missile could be thrown, Jess had gone. She darted from tree to tree with artistic speed. Far above mossflower ground, in the upmost terraces of foliage, the champion squirrel turned her flight in the direction of Redwall Abbey. Sometime around early evening, Jess arrived back, springing lightly from a high elm branch to the parapet of the abbey wall. She could tell by the sound of happy chattering and general jubilation that once more the picture of Martin was safely back. Bounding down into the grounds, she was surrounded by cheering friends, not the least of whom was Mr. Squirrel, who smothered her with kisses, while their son, Silent Sam, sat upon her shoulder and dampened her head by patting it lovingly with a well-sucked paw. The Woodlanders carried Jess shoulder high into the dining hall, where sat another celebrated hero, Basil Staghair. He looked up momentarily at his comrade from behind a staggering mountain of scrumptious food, and pointed to his leg, which was swathed in a hugely exaggerated bandage. "War wound," Basil muttered, as he demolished a plateful of quince and elderberry pie. "Got to keep the old strength up, you know. Lashings of nourishment. Only way to heal an honorable injury. Feed it. What? Silent Sam hopped upon the table. He showed Basil a tiny scratch on his unsucked paw. The kindly hare inspected it gravely. "Egad, looks like another serious war wound. Better sit here by me, little warrior. Feed it well. That's the ticket." They both tucked in voraciously. Friar Hugo came waddling up, his face a picture of delight. "Good creatures," he chuckled. "The late rose is starting to flourish anew. Eat to your heart's content." Jess placed her paws on the fat mouse's shoulders. The squirrel's face was a mixture of sadness and concern.
Friar Hugo, old friend, brace yourself. I am the bearer of tragic news.
Alarm spread across Hugo's pudgy features. "Tell me, Jess, what dreadful thing has happened?" Jess spoke haltingly in a broken voice.
I fear that Clooney tore up one of your oldest and most venerable dish rags. Alas! Redwall will never see it wipe another plate.
Behind the friar's back, Basil and Sam almost choked with laughter in the middle of an apple cream pudding. Shafts of evening sunlight flooded Great Hall, as old Methuselah worked painstakingly away with needle and thread. He was sewing Martin the warrior back in his former position on the corner of the magnificent Redwall tapestry.